It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where everything feels ordinary until something shatters the silence. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, sipping reheated coffee, staring blankly at my laptop screen, pretending to work. Then my phone vibrated, just once. A group message had come in, one that included my mom, my dad, my two siblings, and me. Nothing unusual at first. We had a family group chat, although it had grown quieter over the past year. Still, the silence had never felt this cold. I opened the message expecting something routine, maybe a birthday reminder, an update on a relative I barely knew, or one of Dad's awkward forwarded memes. Instead, my eyes landed on 12 words that twisted my stomach into knots. "We think it's best you step away for now. Love, Mom and Dad." That was it. No warning, no explanation, just a decision, made, finalized, and sent out like an official notice. At first, I stared at the screen thinking maybe it was a mistake, maybe they meant it for someone else. Maybe their phones had auto-corrected a totally different message. But the longer I looked at those words, the more they began to dig into me. I read them again and again. Each time they felt sharper, colder, more intentional. I didn't know how to respond, or if I even should. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my chest tightened. Was this exile? Was this how they chose to cut me off, through a group text? A digital rejection, sanitized and efficient. No conversation, no face-to-face courage. Just a notification. The silence that followed was even worse. No one replied. Not my sister, who used to call me every week. Not my younger brother, who I'd helped through his darkest moments. Just silence. My parents had spoken for everyone, or maybe no one had the courage to go against them. I'll never really know. I replayed everything in my head, every conversation from the past year, every argument, every family dinner where I felt like a stranger. I'd always tried to be honest, maybe too honest. I questioned things they didn't want questioned. I challenged the way we avoided talking about real emotions. I didn't fit the mold they expected me to stay in. And slowly, I had become the problem child. The difficult one, the one who brings tension, the one who makes things about themselves. That's what they had said before, quietly, subtly, like accusations wrapped in concern. But nothing prepared me for this message. I had read stories about people being disowned, cut off, ghosted by their own blood. I never thought I'd be one of them. I didn't cry right away. I felt hollow more than anything, as if something inside me had been scooped out. That group chat had once been a lifeline. Clumsy, chaotic, sometimes irritating, but it was family. Now it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had been delivered, and I hadn't even been allowed to speak. I closed the message and sat there for hours. I didn't eat. I didn't check social media. I didn't tell anyone. It was too surreal, too humiliating. There was something so final about it, and yet I had no idea what it even truly meant. Step away from what? From family events? From holidays? From their lives entirely? I wasn't just hurt. I was unmoored, like I had been untethered from the only roots I'd ever known, floating in emotional freefall, trying to make sense of something that had no logic, only wounds. And in that silence, in that unbearable stillness, one question echoed the loudest. If my own family could do this, what does that make me? Looking back, I wish I could point to a single moment that caused the fracture. Something clear and defined, like a sharp word at a holiday dinner or a betrayal that couldn't be taken back. But that would be too simple. The truth is, the rift in my family grew slowly, like a hairline crack in glass. Invisible at first, but widening with every unspoken word and buried resentment. It wasn't a bomb that exploded, it was erosion. On the surface, we looked like a tight-knit family. My parents had always prided themselves on unity, tradition, the image of strength. We had birthday dinners, Sunday barbecues, group photos in matching sweaters. But behind that image was something far more brittle. We didn't talk about uncomfortable truths. We didn't disagree out loud. And when emotions surfaced, Fear, grief, even joy if it was too loud, they were quietly ushered back inside. "Don't make a scene," my mother would say. "Don't ruin the moment." I grew up trying to be the version of myself that wouldn't cause waves. I got good grades, said thank you at the right times, and smiled in every photo. But inside, I felt like I was performing, and the older I got, the harder it became to keep playing the part. The first real rupture came after I moved out. It wasn't anything scandalous. I didn't run off to join a cult or reject the family name. I just started to express myself. I made different life choices. I asked questions. I stopped showing up to every single gathering just to keep the peace. I started going to therapy, and that, strangely enough, was the beginning of the end. Because therapy gave me language for things my family had always dismissed. Words like boundaries and emotional neglect weren't welcome in our house. I wasn't accusing anyone of being monsters. I just wanted to heal. But in my family's eyes, healing was rebellion. My growth felt like betrayal to them. Conversations turned awkward. My attempts at vulnerability were met with deflection or silence. When I tried to bring up things from our past, not to blame but to understand, I was met with phrases like, "We did our best," or "Why are you bringing this up now?" Eventually, I stopped trying. Meanwhile, my siblings began to drift in a different direction. They clung harder to the family script. They didn't necessarily agree with everything, but they didn't challenge it either. They were still inside the circle, and I was on the edge, peering in. At first, I thought it was just distance, that we'd find our way back. But then came the birthday I wasn't invited to, the holiday dinner I found out about through a Facebook post, the phone calls that went unanswered. Still, I held on to the belief that, deep down, we loved each other enough to work through it, that the bond of blood was stronger than silence. I was wrong. The group message, that cold little paragraph that told me to step away, didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of slowly becoming invisible in a family that only saw what it wanted to see. The rift had been growing, quietly and steadily, for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Maybe they thought they were protecting themselves. Maybe they genuinely believed I was the one creating division. But I know what I felt. I felt like the truth I was chasing, my truth, made me unlovable in their world. And still, through all of it, I kept hoping someone would speak up. That someone would say, "This isn't right." That someone would see me not as the problem, but as a person worth listening to. That someone turned out to be my aunt. After the message, the world didn't end. The sun still rose, my alarm still rang, emails still came in. But everything felt different. I was walking through the same world, yet nothing looked the same. It was like color had drained from the scenery, leaving only muted shapes, and the echo of that text repeating in my mind, "We think it's best you step away for now." What haunted me most wasn't the words themselves, it was the silence that followed. No one added anything to the message, no clarification, no voice of protest, no attempt to soften the blow, just a cold, collective nothing, and that nothing was loud. I kept checking the group chat compulsively, like a person waiting for their partner to text after a fight. Maybe I missed something. Maybe someone was typing. Maybe someone was going to break away from the pack and say what I needed to hear, that it was a mistake, that they didn't mean it, that this wasn't the end. But the typing bubble never appeared. Hours passed, then a day, then two. My mind spun in every direction. Did I do something specific? Did I say something in that last conversation with Mom that pushed things too far? Was it because I didn't show up to my brother's baby shower? Was it the therapy post I made on Instagram that made them uncomfortable? I wasn't just grieving the message. I was tearing myself apart, looking for evidence that I deserved it. I stopped eating normally. I slept too much or not at all. My work became mechanical, just motions I went through to fill the hours. I didn't tell my friends right away. It felt too personal, too strange. There's a kind of shame that comes with being rejected by your own family, as if their silence said something deeper about me than I was ready to face. The apartment, usually a space of freedom and self-expression, started to feel like a cell. I avoided mirrors. I avoided my reflection in the microwave. I didn't want to see what they had pushed away. Because if the people who raised me, who knew me since birth, could decide I wasn't safe to be around, what did that say about me? And still, I didn't respond. I didn't ask why. Something inside me, pride or fear or maybe just exhaustion, held me back. I had already begged for belonging too many times. I wasn't going to beg again. Not this time, not after everything. But in that deafening quiet, I did something unexpected. I opened an old photo album, the real kind, not a digital gallery. I turned pages filled with birthday hats and ice cream-stained smiles. My dad grilling with a beer in hand, my mom in her apron laughing, my siblings and me in forts made of blankets. I stared at those photos like they were fossils of a world that no longer existed, and maybe never did, at least not the way I believed. That night, I wrote a letter, not to them, to myself. I wrote everything I wished someone had said to me, that I mattered, that I wasn't a mistake, that I didn't have to twist myself into shapes to be loved. I folded it, placed it under my pillow and tried to sleep. The silence didn't stop screaming, but I no longer felt completely erased. And then, just when I'd accepted the quiet might be permanent, my phone lit up again. A single message from someone I hadn't heard from in months. My aunt. Her name popping up on my phone felt like an interruption in a dream, or maybe a crack of light through a tightly sealed room. I hadn't heard from Aunt Rachel in over 6 months, not because of any falling out between us, but because she had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed on the edge of the family's chaos. She was more observer than participant, a presence I'd always felt but rarely understood. So when I saw her name, I hesitated. I braced myself. I wasn't sure if this was going to be another blow or just an awkward attempt to stay neutral. But when I opened the message, it was just 4 words. I don't agree, come. That was it. No lecture, no analysis, no sugarcoating, just a message that cut through the silence like a lifeline. For the first time in days, I felt something warm stir in my chest, something like relief or validation, or maybe just the shocking realization that I wasn't completely alone. I read those words again, this time slower. I don't agree. She had seen the group message. She knew, and she was standing apart from it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. In our family, where silence was the language of loyalty, her words were an act of defiance. And then came the second part. Come, a single syllable, an open door, an invitation I hadn't expected from anyone. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure I could trust the hope that started blooming inside me. I'd been taught not to expect much from people, especially not when it came to choosing me over the comfort of staying silent. But Aunt Rachel had done it anyway, quietly, bravely. Within minutes, she sent another message, this one longer. She wrote, I've been watching everything for a while. I don't always speak up, but I've never stopped caring. If you need somewhere to breathe, my door is open. I remember sitting on the floor, phone in my hand, tears running down my face. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because someone had finally acknowledged the rupture. And more than that, someone had chosen to see me without the need for me to explain or justify or shrink myself. I replied simply, thank you. I don't know what to say. She wrote back, you don't have to say anything. Just come. That night I packed a small bag. I didn't overthink it. I didn't plan out what I'd say or how long I'd stay. I just needed to move, to escape the walls that now felt too full of silence and shame. I took my car keys, left the apartment, and drove 2.5 hours to her house. The same house where I had once stayed during a summer as a teenager, hiding from my parents' fights. Back then she had been the safe space I didn't even know I needed. She met me at the door in slippers and a sweatshirt. No grand speeches, just a hug. Long, solid, wordless. And in that moment, something inside me cracked open. Not in pain, but in healing. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. And I realized Sometimes love doesn't show up in loud declarations or perfect apologies. Sometimes it shows up in 4 quiet words. Aunt Rachel's house hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same blue shutters, same overgrown hydrangeas by the front porch, same faint smell of cinnamon and old wood when you walked in. It wasn't fancy or picture perfect like my parents' house had tried to be, but there was a lived-in comfort to it, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you. Just a space that says, "You're safe here." She didn't ask me a million questions when I arrived. She didn't prod or poke or press. She simply made tea, handed me a blanket and let me sit in silence as the warmth of the room slowly replaced the cold I'd been carrying. We talked later when I was ready. I told her everything, from the message to the silence to the hollow days that followed. I told her how I felt like I'd been slowly disappearing in my own family, like I was being erased for the crime of trying to be honest, of needing space, of not playing along anymore. She listened, really listened, not with interruptions or with the kind of nodding that just waits for its turn to speak. She let me pour it all out, without once trying to fix it or reframe it to protect the image of the family. That in itself felt revolutionary. "I always saw it," she said quietly when I paused. "Even when you were little, I saw how much you tried to hold everything together. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever acknowledged that part of me before. Not even I had, but she had seen it. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a problem that needed to be solved. I felt like a person who had been surviving in silence." Over the next few days, her house became a sort of sanctuary. There was no agenda, no expectations, just the simple, radical act of being allowed to exist as I was. We cooked meals together, sometimes talking, sometimes not. She showed me old photos of her and my mum, ones I'd never seen before. We laughed at a video of my uncle singing karaoke off-key at a family wedding. We even cried a little, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but in those quiet moments when emotion simply rose and needed room. She told me stories I'd never heard, about her own falling out with the family years ago, about how long it had taken her to find her voice again, about how silence had once nearly swallowed her too. I realized then that I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. Our family had generations of hurt, passed down like heirlooms no one wanted to name. But here, in her living room, surrounded by plants she talked to like old friends and books stacked in every corner, I began to see a different kind of legacy, one of quiet rebellion, of choosing compassion over control, of love that doesn't come with conditions. At night, I slept more deeply than I had in months. Not because everything was solved, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next emotional hit. I wasn't trying to decode silences or read between the lines. I was just allowed to be. I didn't know how long I would stay, neither did she. It didn't matter. There was no clock ticking, no judgment, just a shared understanding that sometimes family isn't defined by who shares your blood, but by who opens their door when everyone else shuts theirs. It wasn't revenge I wanted, or confrontation. I didn't rehearse some grand speech in the mirror or plan to catch them off guard. What I wanted, what I needed, was something far quieter, closure, or maybe clarity. Just a moment where I could say, "Here I am. You don't have to love me the way I hoped, but you will see me." It took 2 weeks at Aunt Rachel's before I found the courage to reach out. I sent a message to the family group chat. No drama, just, "I'd like to talk, in person, if you're open to it." They agreed to meet, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, part of them knew something had gone too far. We met at my parents' house, the same living room where I had opened Christmas presents as a kid, where we posed for pictures that painted over the silence, where just a year ago I had stood at Thanksgiving, trying to explain why I wouldn't be coming every holiday just to keep pretending everything was fine. My mom sat on the edge of the couch, twisting a tissue in her hands. My dad leaned back, arms crossed. My sister glanced at me, then looked away. My brother gave a weak smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. No one spoke at first, so I did. I told them how the message affected me, How it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a sentence. One that left me wondering if I'd ever been truly loved or just tolerated as long as I stayed within the script. I told them I didn't come to accuse or demand anything. I just wanted them to see what their silence had cost. There were tears, some defensive words, some apologies that landed awkwardly, like they weren't sure how to form around the truth. My dad said, "We thought we were giving you space." My mum said, "You were changing so fast and we didn't know how to help." My sister admitted, "I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing." And then my aunt, who had quietly sat next to me like an anchor, spoke. She didn't need space. She needed support. And you all knew that. It wasn't said with anger. It was said with love, the kind of love that tells the truth, even when it's inconvenient. No one replied, but the silence this time wasn't empty. It was different, like air being let into a sealed room. I didn't walk out of that meeting with a magically healed family. We didn't hug and promise to be closer than ever, but I walked out with something more important: dignity. I had faced them, not as a broken child begging to be let back in, but as a whole person. One who had suffered, yes, but who had survived and grown, and they saw it. Whether they wanted to or not, they saw me. I don't know what happens next. Maybe we slowly rebuild, maybe we don't, but either way, I know this. I am not invisible. I am not wrong for needing what I needed, and I'm no longer waiting for their permission to be myself, because sometimes you lose everything, and that's exactly when you start to find your real life. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever felt silenced by the ones who should have protected you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, share your story, and subscribe for more real, raw narratives that remind us we're never as alone as we think. New stories drop every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.